Why don't we start with the president's comments from last night? He says it's between 15 and 50%, the 50% going to countries and nation blocks, maybe even that aren't cooperative. What does that signal to you about kind of the developments when it comes to these tariff deals 1 week away from that August 1st deadline?
Well, look, I think the administration has done a pretty good job on these last four agreements, these frameworks. There are three aspects to this. One is we want tariff-free exports to these countries, and we've achieved that. And then the tariff that goes on these countries' exports to the U.S., and that's where that 15 to 50 comes in. It's come in from about 50 to 20, so a lot less than the reciprocal tariffs were initially, deemed, initially set. There's a third bucket, and that is some transactions. For example, Japan, the $500 billion investment in the U.S., financing of the investment. In Vietnam and others, it will be purchase of U.S. aircraft. That third bucket is where I think these agreements are getting stuck. And the administration's position is if we can't agree on that, then we'll go back to a higher tariff. But I will say this, Frank, is that they've done a good job, credit where credit is due, in using threats to increase the negotiating leverage. And that's worked very well. And it doesn't always work, especially for people like Japan, where they know how to negotiate.
Right now, the EU and China, they're having their own summit right now. We were just, talking about some of the headlines coming out of there, and it seems to be at least a little bit tense. The EU trying to rebalance the trade situation there. The fact that it's a bit tense, is that good for U.S.-China negotiations? Because clearly China's tried to go to Southeast Asia and other parts of the world and make deals to kind of mitigate, I guess, the impact of U.S. tariffs.
Yeah, I wouldn't bet on a big breakthrough. The European Union's concerns about trade with China are as strong as ours. So they've got a lot of issues to bring to the table. And it is a very tense relationship. It's not easy to agree with the European Union because you have to agree with a lot of countries. And especially on something like China. So the intent is obvious. They want to get closer at a time when there are tensions with the U.S. on both of their sides.
Well, Carlos, is that good for the U.S.-China trade deal? Is that good for the U.S.-EU trade deal? Is it a read on anything else involving the U.S. negotiations?
I don't think it changes the game. I don't think it's going to be a positive. I don't think they're going to break through, and I don't think it's going to be a terrible negative. I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think a lot of it will come out. I think it's a lot of the actions of going through the motions.
As someone who's been a commerce secretary, I want to ask you, some of these tariffs, the country-specific tariffs, are being, kind of argued in court right now, and there's a chance that the courts could strike them down. What does that mean for the president's trade policy? How would that impact this trade policy and some of these things that you were just talking about, where countries are buying things from the U.S. and things like that? Would this perhaps lead a lot of countries to say, let me try to hold off and see how the courts decide to rule on all this?
Well, I think countries are generally behaving like the U.S. is going to go through and the U.S. is going to have leeway. Last time it was challenged. The U.S. eventually got its way by going through 232 and national security. So I think the administration will find some way to exert its position on tariffs, on trade. So maybe a specific tariff doesn't work, but I think they'll find a way to eventually exert pressure on that country. So if I were the countries, I wouldn't bank on that. I think you've got to assume that the president's going to have all the legal leeway he needs to move forward. It's a bit of a risk to assume that the courts will stand in his way.
So, Carlos, you joined us earlier this year, and you thought this would kind of all be resolved for the most part by now. We're a week away from the deadline. Do you see us a week away from resolving all these tariff negotiations, the president just putting that 15 to 15 down, and we move on from there? Or do you see it potentially being extended and just more active negotiations?
Well, it's getting resolved, right? So the reciprocal tariffs have not been put in place. If anything, they've been dropped by about 50% in these last four frameworks that we've seen. The big countries that we have to watch really is EU, Korea, and India. Everything else is important, but those are the ones that can really impact the deficit, impact the economy, the global economy. And I think those are, headed towards some kind of a resolution. There may be one of those three that don't get resolved, and that the reciprocal tariff goes in place, and that all these threats become real. but I don't believe they will stay in place for too long. This is, in a sense, especially with the European Union, this is mutually assured destruction. So they're getting resolved little by little. The important ones are the top 10, and that's coming through. And if something goes on August 1, it's not going to be for long.